My name is Jeff Morgan, and I'm from Dallas, Texas. I want to comment about attorney fees in family courts. And I think that this is going to be very interesting because attorneys, family court attorneys will tell you, oh, you know, my fees are like $300 an hour, and $300 is pretty much on the cheap side. If you get a family court attorney that's only $300 an hour, they either live in a rural area or maybe they're just starting, or they don't have a lot of experience, or maybe they're not that great, because you get attorneys that will be charging $550 an hour and more, and they will say that it's reasonable, it's necessary, and it's customary. So I remember talking with a friend of mine, and he's actually very, very good at analyzing data. So he went through the data from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and the average wage of an attorney in, say, the Austin area or Dallas, I believe is under $75 an hour, between $60 and $75 an hour. So it makes you think, if the average wage is between $60 and $75 an hour thereabout, why is it that these family law attorneys think that they are worth $350, $450, $550, even more than that dollars an hour? And what I did then is, well, I pulled the data from the state of Texas, because in the state of Texas, we have attorneys that work for our state government. And I went down through, fielded every single one of the attorneys, and I believe this was from the year 2021. And so here's the results that I found from the state of Texas, the attorneys that work for the state of Texas. So the attorneys that I saw, and maybe I missed a couple, but it looked like there was 1,742 attorneys that work for the state of Texas. Now, the wages that they received from the state of Texas for their work ranged from a minimum of $46,000 approximately up to $189,000. And $189,000 is only like one, I believe, that makes that much. There are a few that make, I think, $170, something like that. But anyway, I believe there's only one that makes $189,000. I don't have the data in front of me right now. But I also looked at, say, even the Attorney General of the state of Texas, because the Attorney General is is a person who has a lot of responsibilities, and I know that he is working more than 40 hours a week. And his salary, just like our governor's salary, is $153,750. $153,750. So I thought to myself, well, it's very interesting to see that the fees, that the salaries for these attorneys have such a wide range, from $46,000 to $189,000. And the Attorney General of the state of Texas makes about $154,000. So I went a little bit further and looked at some of the numbers again, and I did a cutoff at $101,000. So if you were an attorney in the state of Texas that made under $101,000, there were 1,200 of you. And the average salary among attorneys who work for the state of Texas was $81,000. So then I looked at the attorneys that actually made more than $100,000, and I think $101,000. I think one of the attorneys even made $101,000.04, and he was in the upper. He or she was in this group right here. So there's 542 attorneys in the state that are employed by the state of Texas that make between $101,000 and the average and the high of $189,000. So once again, I took the average of this group, and the average of this group was about $120,000. Now, if you take the average of all of the attorneys together, I did not do this. I don't know why I didn't do this, but it would obviously be somewhere between $81,000 and $120,000, but I would guess it would be under $100,000. So then I said, well, let's take this one step further then. How much do they make per hour? Because that's something that we want to know. Because if we have family law attorneys that are charging $350, $450, $550, and even more dollars an hour, how does their hourly rate compare to these attorneys, even the Attorney General of the state of Texas? Because they claim, the family law attorneys claim that their salaries, their hourly wage are reasonable, they're necessary, and they're customary. How does this work out? basically we look at our wages as being divided by 2,087 hours. And that's a very simple calculation. There's 52 weeks in a year times 40 hours. That's 2,080 hours. There's a leap year. So leap year that comes every 4 years. So that's basically basically you get about another 7 hours for each year is what it comes down to. So 2,087 is the hour factor that we use, the hour denominator that we use to find out how much they make per hour. And what we do when we look at this, we put the salary up on top, we put the hours on the bottom. So I went through all of these different people in the state of Texas and what they make an hour. Here's an attorney. Now the lowest paying attorneys for the state of Texas, $46,000 a year, they make about $22 an hour. Well, maybe they have an incentive to become a family law attorney and they can charge $550 an hour, right? Now, the attorneys that make $81,000 an hour, and again, that was the average that I came to between all of the attorneys that make less than $101,000, they make $39 an hour. If you make $81,000 a year, you're making approximately $39 an hour, and that is based on a 40-hour work week. $101,000, again, that was the cap that I used right there. If you make $101,000 an hour, you're making $48.50 an hour. The average of the upper group, the ones that went from $101,000 to $189,000, that average was $120,000. That's $57.50 an hour. $120,000, you are making 1/10 per hour of what some of these anti-family attorneys claim is reasonable, is customary, and necessary. The Attorney General for the state of Texas, he makes $153,750. And again, assuming that he's just working a 40-hour work week, which I am pretty sure he does not work just a 40-hour work week. I'm sure he's working much more than that. But he's making $73.67 an hour. A person who is defending our state against federal encroachment, a person who is leading other attorneys general throughout the United States to fight back against federal governments, he's making $73.67 an hour. And by the way, that's the same thing our governor makes, Governor Greg Abbott. The highest paid attorney in the state of Texas, $189,000, he's making $90.50 an hour. So how is it that if the highest paid attorney for the state of Texas is making $90.50 an hour, what is it that these anti-family attorneys think they do that is so great and magnificent that they charge $350, $450, $550 an hour and more? What is it that they do? Something seems to be absurd here. So anyway, my point in going over this is that I think one of the things we ought to be doing is looking at capping attorney fees. We need to cap attorney fees in the anti-family courts. I believe that the attorney fees are exorbitant. I believe that what they are doing right now is that they are price gouging people. And it's very interesting because if we would have a natural disaster right now, the Attorney General for the state of Texas would be on the lookout for price gougers to actually find them. If there's a hurricane and all of a sudden people want to get gas and gas is selling for $8 a gallon versus, $3 or whatever it is a gallon right now, about $3. If they double it, if they triple it, well, hey, it's supply and demand. You want the gas, you're going to pay $12 for a gallon for gas. That would be considered price gouging by the Attorney General. And yet that $12 for a gallon of gas is only 4 times more than the normal $3 for the gallon of gas. Why is it that these anti-family attorneys can charge 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 times what our state attorneys are making which would be reasonable and customary. Why is it that they can make 8 times more than what the average, according to the data, the business labor statistics data? Why is it they get charged so much more than that? And I believe that when you're in a situation like going through a divorce or some type of modification, you're under stress already. It would be trauma. In fact, it would kind of be considered, in my opinion, kind of like a hurricane situation. You have to leave the area to go to safety. And many times people go to family court, anti-family court, they don't even want to be there. But because an attorney is filing a motion on behalf of his or her client at $450, $550 an hour or more, you must go there or you can lose a lot. And I believe that the Attorney General of the state of Texas should be investigating this practice among the family law attorneys for price gouging. And I would also say too for price fixing. Now price fixing may be a federal level, but if you listen to the attorneys and you ask them, how is it that you've come to these fees? And they say, well, we submit surveys among ourselves and we compare the data. So they kind of like, somebody raises their price, somebody else raises their price. Well, we're going to choose, we're like them, so we're going to raise our price too. That's called price fixing. When you go against to see what your competitors are charging and you raise your rates to match theirs, that is price fixing. That is an illegal practice and it's an abuse that our attorneys are committing, in my opinion, on a daily basis in the state of Texas. Our anti-family law attorneys, somehow they think that they're worth $350 an hour, $450, $550 an hour, and then what'll happen is to people, they can't pay the attorney fees, and then the attorney abandons them before trial. Well, if you can't pay my fees, I'm going to abandon you. This is abuse upon abuse. It's not only financial abuse, it's abuse when you abandon a person. And then you want the other person, who may be a very innocent spouse, to pay the fees. That is a third type of an abuse. And what I believe is that the Attorney General of the state of Texas should be investigating the entire law industry, especially the family law industry, for this type of abuse, for price gouging and price fixing. And furthermore, I would ask the legislature to start to take this up as an issue. And I'm going to use, and I don't think you should be an attorney to take this up as an issue. In fact, I think that a non-attorney should take this up. In our Texas Constitution, Article 3, Section 22, it basically states that if you are in the legislature and if your private practice can business by a piece of legislation going forward, that you are to inform somebody regarding that, and then you are supposed to not vote on the issue. So here's what I believe should happen right now. I believe that we should get a good legislator, a strong legislator who says, we have seen this abuse, we are going to be against this abuse. And by the way, any attorney in here that wants to vote to keep the status quo, that wants to vote to keep the family law industry making money, that wants to vote for any type of attorney to price gouge and to price fix it, you cannot vote. If your business will profit from this, you are recused from voting. Now, it may be that only half of the legislature gets to vote because we know that there are so many attorneys that run for a legislative position, which brings up another problem in itself. But I do believe that this is an issue that needs to be investigated. I do hope that perhaps this is something that we can ask our Attorney General, Ken Paxton, the Attorney General, Ken Paxton, who fights for people, who fights against price gouging, who fights against price fixing, I'm sure, if he was aware of it. I would love to see this actually go into place, and that we should start monitoring the attorney fees. And for one final thing I would say as well, I've been watching a couple of judges lately. One of the courts has recently stated that if you're an attorney and if you are talking about your fees in front of the judge, you must be sworn in. And I've been seeing a couple of judges not swearing in attorneys. This is a problem. If you are a judge, you can't say, well, you know, because you're an officer of the court, I trust you. I'm not going to have to swear you in. If you're a judge that's doing that, you are incorrect. You need to be swearing in the attorneys. And because I believe that they should also be cross-examined about their fees. And I believe they should be cross-examined vigorously. What's happening in many instances, attorneys are not cross-examining other attorneys vigorously. Why is that? They don't want to be too vigorous, because if they're too vigorous, maybe the other attorney will cross-examine their fees too vigorously. And I've heard of one judge, Jesse Navarez. He had an attorney appear before him. He was asking for $80,000, I believe it was, in attorney fees. And Jesse's looked, he said, I don't believe you've done this work. cut his fees down to, I believe it was $5,000. And I believe that some of these judges, if you want to be ethical judges, transparent judges, and not judges that are part of the club, not judges that are perpetuating this abuse of the people, that you ought to also be saying, okay, attorneys, you've come in here, you've given us a bill. What is your hourly rate? $550 an hour. That's very interesting. So how do you justify $550 an hour? Well, we take a survey among ourselves and we find out and we kind of place ourselves in the category, and this is a reasonable and it's a necessary and it's a customary fee. That should be considered price fixing. And that should be something that that judge should actually say, okay, you know what? I'm going to file a complaint against you because of your ethical problems. Or the judge should, on the other hand, say, well, it doesn't make sense to me because the average, according to the Data, Labor and Bureau statistics, is about $75, and you're charging $550 an hour. That is price gouging. Now, I would say that we can put some limits on. I would say that whatever the, because, you know, if you're an individual practitioner or something like that, and you have your own office, if you're a sole practitioner, you might say, hey, I've got to pay for my own insurance and stuff like that. So, you know what? Double it. But if you're working for a law firm, and that law firm is taking care of these things, really all you're doing is making money for the law firm. The individual should not be paying for the overhead for the law firm. The individual should not be paying additional so that the law firm itself can profit. You pay for the, if it's the attorney fees that you're talking about, what is your basic rate? Not how much do you charge for overhead, not how much you charge for this and charge for that. Your basic rate, I'm sorry, but this has been price fixing and price gouging, and I believe that this should be investigated by the Attorney General of the state of Texas. I also believe that our legislature should take this up and should actually say, attorneys, we are putting forth this bill, and guess what? You don't get to vote on it because you will vote in such a way as will favor your pocketbooks, and we are not going to allow this. And yet we have family law attorneys who go much higher than 5 times more what is the average typical rate. They often go 10 times more, and these people are not being investigated for price gouging. Something is wrong. Maybe there's a conflict of interest. Maybe we need to have a whole commission on this to investigate what is going on. The family law industry brings no value as far as I'm concerned. They are a destructive force, and we should not be subsidizing their industry of destruction. Anyway, that's it. Getting back to this right here, attorney fees, state of Texas, they range, the attorney salaries range from $46,000 to $189,000, the highest person. The Attorney General of the state of Texas makes $154,000. Of course, they get some benefits. You might add another, even 30% for that. So we'll say that instead of $154,000, maybe he makes about $200,000 with benefits included and retirement, whatever. So you might say that the attorneys, you know, the family law attorneys, take the highest if you want to, you know, $90 an hour, add another 30% to it, and we'll cap you at about, what, about $125 an hour? Anything more than that is price gouging. And $125 an hour, and being a little bit generous with it. Right now we are subsidizing an industry that is killing our state, killing our families, killing our society, killing and traumatizing men, women, and children, grandparents, and others. These people consider themselves to be heroes. They are not. This is a criminal syndicate, and I do not believe they should be able to charge 5, 6, 8, 10 times the amount of what the average attorney fee is there, and just say, well, that's reasonable, customary, and necessary. Thank you.
For the most part, our 17th century colonists were scrupulously fair, even in fear. And there was one group of people they feared with reason. A society, you might say, whose often insidious craft had claimed a multitude of victims, even since the Middle Ages in Europe. One group of people hated and feared from Massachusetts Bay to Virginia. The magistrates would not burn them at the stake, although surely a great many of the colonists might have recommended such a solution. But this one group of people remained hated perhaps more than any other in our earliest American colonies. In the first place, our forefathers were baffled by them. Where did they come from? Of all who had sailed from England to Plymouth in 1620, not one of those two-legged vermin was aboard. That's right, vermin. That's what the colonists called them. Parasites who fed on human misery. That's what the colonists called them. Spreading sorrow and confusion wherever they went. Destructive That's what the colonists called them, and still they were permitted to coexist with the colonists for a while. For a while. Of course, there were colonial laws prohibiting the practice of their infamous craft, and somehow a way was always found around the laws. In 1641, Massachusetts Bay Colony took a novel approach to the problem. The governors attempted to starve these devils out of existence through economic exclusion. They were denied wages. Thereby, it was hoped that they would perish. 4 years later, Virginia followed the example of Massachusetts Bay, and for a while it seemed that the dilemma was resolved, but it was not. Somehow the parasites managed to survive, and the mere nearness of them made the colonists' skin crawl. In 1658, in Virginia, the final solution: banishment, exile. The treacherous ones, I'm quoting, the treacherous ones were cast out of the colony. And at long last, after decades of enduring the psychological gloom, the sun came out, and the birds sang, and all was right with the world. That elation continued for but one generation. I am not sure why the Virginians eventually allowed the outcasts to return, but they did. In 1680, after 22 years, the despised ones were readmitted to the colony on the condition that they be subjected to the strictest surveillance. Ah, how soon we forget. For indeed, over the next half-century or so, the imposed restrictions were slowly, quietly swept away, and those whose treachery had been feared since the Middle Ages ultimately took their place in society. Vermin is what they had been called. Parasites is what they had been called. Destructive is what they had been called. But these, the vermin that once infested colonial America, the parasites that preyed on the misfortune of their neighbors, until finally they were officially banished from Virginia, those dreaded, despised, inevitably outcast masters of confusion were lawyers. And now you know the rest of the story.